Hey, have you ever felt like your world is just one big storm, and you're doing everything you can just to stay afloat? If that's you, then you're in the right place. Today, we're diving into Psalm 93. It's short, but it's an incredibly powerful song for anyone who feels battle-weary and is just looking for some solid ground to stand on.
So let's just start with a direct question for you. When life gets chaotic, when those waves of anxiety or just circumstance start crashing in on you, what's your anchor? It's a feeling we all know, right? And it's exactly that feeling that this psalm speaks directly into.
All right, let's get into it. This psalm is a song for the weary because it doesn't pretend the tension we feel isn't real. It looks the chaos of the world straight in the eye, but, and this is key, it doesn't start there.
And this is such a crucial point. Before the psalm even mentions the storm, it establishes a foundational reality. It doesn't begin with our feelings or our fears. It starts with this powerful, unshakable declaration of what is true, whether we feel like it is in the moment or not.
And that declaration brings us right here, to the psalm's anchor, the unshakable throne. This is the foundation that has to be laid before we can even think about looking at the floods and all the chaos.
Now, what's so interesting here is the language. This isn't an argument, it's not a suggestion, it's an announcement. It's a headline. The psalmist uses all this kingly imagery, robed in majesty, belted with strength, to declare that God's authority isn't just real, it's completely unchallenged.
And this just illustrates the contrast so perfectly. I mean, think about it. Every human ruler, every empire, every single government has a start date and an end date. They rise and they will inevitably fall. But God's throne, it's established from of old. It has no origin point, no inauguration day, and zero threat of ever being overthrown. It's eternal. So here's the bottom line. God isn't in heaven, anxiously watching the news, just reacting to events as they unfold down here. No, He is reigning. And that perspective shift, that's the anchor that's meant to ground us before we even dare to look at the storm.
Now, after firmly establishing that God reigns, the psalm does something incredibly honest. It turns and it directly confronts the reality of our struggle. It gets real.
Okay, I want you to notice the repetition that happens over the next few slides. The psalm starts to build, kind of like waves gathering strength. It begins here with this simple fact. The floods have lifted up.
Then, the chaos finds its voice. It gets loud. The psalmist says the floods have lifted up their voice. You know, that roaring noise that demands our attention and it threatens to drown out everything else. And finally, here's the peak. The floods lift up their roaring. The psalmist doesn't minimize the storm. It doesn't tell us to just ignore it. It lets us feel the full, overwhelming weight of the chaos. And that is so incredibly validating. So what do these floods actually look like for us? Well, you know what they are. They're the circumstances at work that are just spiraling. It's that anxiety that just won't quiet down at 2 a.m. It's the pain of conflict or loss. It's that paralyzing uncertainty about what's coming next.
And this brings us to the central tension of the psalm, and honestly, of the Christian life, right? We live between these two realities. On the one hand, we hold to the truth that God is on His throne. And on the other, we experience the very real, very loud roaring of the floods.
And now we get to the turning point. After establishing God's reign and acknowledging the reality of the storm, the psalm finally gives its powerful, tension-resolving answer.
Just listen to that comparison. The psalmist doesn't deny the power of the waves. In fact, he actually amplifies it, calling it thunders of many waters. But then he makes the declaration, the Lord on high is mightier. Not just a little bit stronger. We're talking overwhelmingly, decisively mightier.
And notice his position, the Lord on high. That little phrase is everything. He isn't down in the waves, struggling right alongside us. He is enthroned above the chaos. It doesn't threaten him. He rules over it.
And this is where God's power connects to His character. You see, His reign isn't just about raw strength, it's about faithfulness. Because He is mighty, His decrees, His promises of rescue, of preservation, of justice, they're completely trustworthy. They are guaranteed realities, not just wishful thinking.
So, let's bring all this home. How does this kind of theological reality of an all-powerful reigning God provide real, tangible security for you and for me when we're in the middle of our own storms? Well, the psalm gives us this simple three-step process for our souls. First, you lift your eyes. Look above the waves to the throne. You have to start there. Second, be honest about the storm. Acknowledge the roaring. And third, you resolve that tension by anchoring yourself in the greater reality. God is mightier.
This right here, this is the core mindset shift that Psalm 93 is inviting us into. We are so tempted to look at the chaos in our lives and then question God's control, right? This psalm calls us to do the exact opposite, to start with the unshakable reality of God's rule and then see our circumstances through that lens. The theologian Jonathan Edwards, he just captured it perfectly. Real, lasting comfort. It's not found in our circumstances finally changing. It's found in the unchanging reality of God's complete and total sovereignty over every single one of our circumstances. So we'll end with this question. The chaos in your life, the anxieties, the uncertainties, they are loud. They absolutely demand to be heard. But according to Psalm 93, they do not get the final word. The King on the throne does. And because he is mightier, your rescue is secure. You can actually rest.